the Ukraine war as seen from the Russian-controlled side. What's that like? Let's get a different perspective on interference. Welcome back to Interference. We're doing the Ukraine war and we have a special guest. This is Luca Steinmann on my left, and he's just written and published this book. Luca is one of the few journalists to have covered the Ukraine war from the Russian-controlled side. As an independent, that means not sponsored by the Russian state, we should obviously point out. And he's written all about it, and this is his second book, and he's going to tell us some of his experiences. And as always, we have Alex, but unusually, we have Alex in the studio.
Yeah, I've come to the EU-controlled side.
Did you have to show your passport when entering the EU?
Oh, got stamps and everything.
Right, you were strip searched before she got into the studio.
They tried to ban me.
Thank you very much for braving the quarantine that we're under here. And so let's get right down to it. Now, obviously, Luca, you are not unique, but very rare in that you've been more than once to the Russian-controlled side of the Ukraine conflict. Tell us why you chose to do it from that angle, please.
Well, first of all, let me tell you that I was not even paid, of course, by the Kremlin, but not even controlled. I was properly able to work pretty freely in the areas occupied by Russia of Ukraine, and we can also talk, and I can tell how as well. Together with the war photographer Gabriele Michalizzi that works with me, we went to the city of Donetsk, so a city in eastern Ukraine de facto controlled by Russia already from 2014, and we reached there on February 18th, 2022. And the day after, it came the order from the Kremlin to close the borders of this area, thus for journalists, for international journalists, thus making me, Gabriele, and a very few other independent people as the only witness that could see what was happening there. So we just stayed there. I had planned to stay 1 week, 10 days, to cover this crisis back then. And I ended up to stay for months and then coming and going regularly there with some technical problems sometimes, let's put it this way, security problems and so on. But I can say that within the last 3 years, I was really able to work in a proper way from these areas, from the Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine, and to make, I hope, an interesting job.
When you say to work properly, what do you mean exactly?
I mean that I was not embedded. That's very important to clarify.
Not embedded.
I
right.
was having my apartments or my hotel rooms in Lugansk, in Donetsk, in Mariupol, in Melitopol, in the region of Kherson, in all the different areas I've been working through. And there was no control on me in the terms of I was not followed by anyone. I could go wherever I wanted. I didn't have, as it happens in some regimes, an official translator or fixer that to help me, but also to control me. I had nothing because there was the Russians back then were expecting no journalists, which were not embedded journalists. So there was no way to assist me, but also to control me in this way. And so I could go in the evenings to the bars where soldiers were gathering, drinking with them and hoping, to make kind of friendship with them so that they could bring me to the front line and so on. So everything was spontaneous. And so I can tell you I could really move freely around within the areas controlled by Russians, but by knowing that, of course, all my material was carefully read and all my TV appearances were carefully listened. So this brought me to consider what kind of consequences this could have on me and on my sources on the ground, because I can publish, I could publish anything, but I was thinking, well, if I go back home and I publish something very bad for Russia, which kind of consequences are going my sources and my local staff, let's say, to pay here, So I had to calculate this, and I think this is part of the journalistic daily job, especially on front lines. But considering this difficult situation, I can say that I cannot complain for how I could work there, and also the freedom I got from many media in Western Europe to work, So it was not always easy, but I think I was able to defend my independent work there.
Until recently, right? You've since been banned, correct?
I have been banned from Russia for 5 years, unfortunately, and I think this is unfortunately part of a game, because if you want to report as an independent in Russia and in the Russian-controlled areas without getting affiliated to Russians, and not becoming a pro-Russian journalist, appearing on pro-Russian TV channels and so on, this can bring problems, But at the same time, I think this brings also among many people I met there a kind of respect. So I'm waiting for this 5 year span to finish.
You want to go back
there, of course, because this is another important point. I'm always, I don't really understand why so few journalists go working on the Russian side of the conflict. It can be complicated, Western journalists, it can be dangerous, but it's very interesting because also you don't have many media reports from there. So you have lots of exclusive material and, speaking with many colleagues which are saying, no, I'm not just going on the Russian side because I don't know why, because I go just on the Ukrainian side. It's a pity for them, first of all, I think.
What were the main things that you found out? Because I'd be interested to know where public opinion lies amongst Russian speakers there, and what the narrative was coming from the Russian troops on the front line. How bad is it out there?
Well, first of all, we have to say that in cities like Donetsk, Lugansk, they have been living in war since 2014, unlike the rest of Ukraine. So for them, war is something that is going on for more than a decade now. And all the witness I could talk with, all the people I could talk with that were there in 2014 when the country broke, the civil war started, they were all telling me that back then the population of Lugansk and Donetsk was divided. It was not all pro-Russian. So I don't agree so much in those saying, the Russian speakers are politically pro-Russians, because they were divided. And also when, the Russian state media claim like Russians are entering Ukraine to fight against a genocide against Russian speakers. I've never seen a genocide in which some of the victims are standing on the perpetrator side. But at the same time, we have to say that those that were mainly for Ukraine in the Donbas region, they had 8 years between 2014 and 22 to live that region if they wanted to, So those that stayed got accustomed to the Russian presence, and many of them started to work together with Russians. So today, if you go to Donetsk, Lugansk, Mariupol, the atmosphere is very pro-Russian. Also because we have to say that since 2014, but also in recent years, the Ukrainian army has been bombing some of the city, especially Donetsk, very, very strongly, with lots of civilian casualties. So those many people from Donetsk identified in the Ukrainian army the main danger, and so they kind of tend to side with the Russians. On the contrary, and before stopping myself, but if you go, for instance, to southern Ukraine, where like in Kherson, in Melitopol, in these regions that are Russian speakers, are populated by Russian speakers, but have been controlled by Russia just since 2022, a large number of people, if not most people, they're not very familiar with Russians because they saw war coming together with what Russian call the liberation, And so they're telling Russian, okay, guys, we speak your same language, we are the same ethnicity, but you brought destruction for us, While if you go to Donetsk, most people see the Ukrainian army as a source of destruction.
It's pretty complicated out there, basically. And so when you read about the war, now that you're in Western Europe, what impression do you get? How much of what we read is propaganda?
There is for sure propaganda, but I think there is more than this, there is not a knowledge of what's happening on the other side, which I think it would be very important to have also in order to make some geopolitical analysis or to try to predict the future of Ukraine. Because if you see, if we would have more information about how people in Donetsk and Lugansk feel, today, then we would probably agree on the fact that it's going to be very hard for Ukraine to ever get back these areas, because they should take over the control of an area that is populated today by a population that is mostly an enemy of the Ukrainian state, you know. So I don't think there are possibilities for, like nowadays, possibilities for the Ukrainian army, Ukrainian state to get back these areas, you know. And indeed, Russia is trying, let's say, to conquer the hearts and the minds of the local people by putting lots of money there, like rebuilding Mariupol, rebuilding Donetsk, you know. So really to try to show them that it is convenient to stay on the Russian side. And here, my last point, most people, you know, language, ethnicity are important, but what most people care the most in all wars I've been seeing is about their own biographies and their own wealth, you know. So the part of the army, the state that is able to guarantee to people like wealth, peace, and a normal life will be the one winning.
And what's morale like amongst the troops? Because it's really, I mean, we hear so many reports that a lot of young Russian conscripts just don't really want to go to the front line. I've read reports that they're using people who face disability issues and mental health issues, ex-convicts, that they're importing soldiers from elsewhere, which gives an indication, at least to the Western reader who engages mainly with the mainstream media, that morale must be very low. And it's very hard for me to also imagine what it must be like to fight somebody who, to look at and to engage with, feels very familiar, feels very similar to yourself.
Well, this is actually a very good point. I was speaking, for instance, a lot with soldiers coming from all over Russia fighting in Ukraine, also with soldiers from Wagner group, the famous mercenary group that was active there. And I was asking them, okay, guys, you have been fighting in Syria, in Sudan, in Venezuela. What's particular in this war? And they were telling me, we are fighting against people that are exactly like us, that speak our own language, but that are strongly motivated to fight against us, even if we would consider them as Russians, you know. So this was impressing them a lot, especially in the first weeks and months of war. Russians didn't expect to be involved in such a long war. I remember the first weeks of war, how ill-equipped the Russians were, like having these troops in which 1 out of 5 was wearing a bullet vest, you know, or a helmet, because they were expecting Ukraine to collapse quickly, and they had been given ordered to handle with guerrilla in like in Mariupol or in Kiev or in Odessa, you know, not fight in the steppe against a well-trained army of motivated people. So these first weeks were very difficult for Russian soldiers. But in this moment, the Russian army kept together, you know, and this makes a difference, I think. I didn't see like many soldiers escaping. Most of them were saying, okay, we're in a very bad condition. It's difficult for us to fight against our, like, people so similar to us in front of us, but we keep on fighting. And here I think that you really can understand the kind of Russian patriotism that is widespread among like many people in the army and in Russia. You know, most of them are thinking this way. They think maybe this war might be wrong, maybe this war might be very bad, but in this war there is a risk that Russia is going to be humiliated by the West. And this is the worst scenario ever. We already remember what happened, they say, in the 90s when you promised us a beautiful word within the Western liberal word, and this didn't happen, you know. So we don't trust you anymore. We want to defend Russia, cost what it costs.
Did you, as Alex mentioned, did you meet any of these Russian soldiers who had been in prison, ex-prisoners?
Yes, the Wagner group was made by many of them, and you can really see through their biographies as how this war is a turning point for the lives of many, you know. I've been, for instance, following a militia made by Russian Armenians, or Russians with Armenian ethnicity, and there I've been writing about them. Their boss, their head, used to be in jail for heavy crimes. I don't remember which one. And then he was, people from Wagner group came to prison and told him, okay, come to fight with us in Bakhmut. And if you fight for 6 months on the front line, you will be released and you will get a Medal of Honor. He did this. He was injured twice, but after these 6 months, he went to Moscow and he was received by Putin that gave him the Medal of Honor. So really, from jail to being a national hero.
Wow.
And then he was praised by receiving the commando of an entire brigade. So for some Russians, if not for many Russians, the so-called military special operation, the invasion of Ukraine, has become an opportunity in the military hierarchies and in the business, because now, for many Russians, the place to be for business, where you have financial support, fiscal support, is the Donbas region.
Did you meet many Russian troops who just said, what am I doing here? I don't agree with this war. I don't understand it. I don't want to be here.
I met individuals, not troops, because if the entire troop says, I don't want to be here, they will probably go somewhere else. I met many individuals, also among journalists, for instance, or soldiers, that were saying it's so hard for us to fight against someone that's, again, I think it's my brother. Many of them have relatives in Ukraine. Many soldiers I met from the Donetsk region have relatives fighting on the other side. You know, this underlying again how the ethnicity is not the main thing in this war in the Donbas. But again, at the end, most of them were saying, I don't agree. So most of them saying that they were not agreeing in this war. At the end, they were keeping on fighting. They were keeping on working for Russia because they were saying, I'm Russian, you know, so I belong to here. And even if I don't agree with what's happening, it's my duty to fight for Russia and to do the best. And these were not necessarily uncultivated people, not like stupid people that are just saying like this, but people that say, this is my motherland and I will keep on fighting for Russia. And I think this really made the difference because the Russian front kept together in difficult moments.
Do you think we're headed for a wider European war?
Well, I didn't think at the beginning that Russia would invade Ukraine in this way, so I might be mistaken. I hope not. You know, I understand the friends from the Baltics, from Poland, fearing it, but I think it can be avoided. And I think in this moment, this is also a very personal thought. Diplomacy is very important because the military dimension, it's important, and many European powers do support Ukraine, which is, I mean, it's their own decision and they have the right to do this, but giving a military support doesn't, I think, shouldn't cancel the fact of having channels to talk, you know, because I don't see any possibilities for Ukraine to get back the areas that they lost. So how long can this war last? What is the military goal of this war, you know? You can support Ukraine, but you should have a channel of communication. If you don't have it, that's bad for us, Europeans, but first of all, that's bad for Ukrainians.
It's really fascinating. I think the thing that's just stood out for me is this idea that the Russians are motivated because they are aware that they're fighting the United West, that they are fighting, say, the EU and the UK and everyone else who is aiding Ukraine. And so do you think that this war is actually driving the wedge between Russian people and the West even deeper?
I don't know. I wouldn't talk about Russian people because I cannot speak, you know, for all of them. But definitely, I saw a switch in the Russian propaganda that was also taken by soldiers and by locals. You know, the war started as a military special operation to free the people from Ukraine by the Nazis. You know, so by this far right group, whatever. So we know all this, the Russian propaganda about this. But then, within the time, it moved to a storytelling against the West, you know. So Ukrainians, our brothers, yes, there might be some small, like, far-right groups fighting on their side, but the main enemy that is attacking us is the West. So there is this turning point, you know, like Russian people, and the Russia propaganda plays on it, consider, like, they say the West is attacking us, historically. It started with Napoleon, it continued with Hitler, and then with the NATO advancing, and now we are defending ourselves. So definitely it came to a confrontation between Russia and the so-called collective West.
Also, this book hasn't yet been translated into English, or has it?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, so this is Vite al fronte, lives on the front line. In it, you draw the connection between the Ukraine conflict and the Middle East conflict. Correct? Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, I would make one very concrete example on this. I've been covering Syria a lot in the last years. And many Syrians, after the hard years of war between the regime, the government, and ISIS or other rebels or terrorist groups, many people were hoping in Russian investments in Syria to rebuild the country, which has almost completely demolished. And Russia never did it. They were happy in having their military bases on the shore in Tartus and Latakia, but they were not making real investments in Syria. Why? Because they started to focus more on Ukraine. They're putting in Ukraine, in Donbas, the money for reconstruction that they didn't put in Syria. Or another point, I'm speaking in this book about the war between Armenians and Azerbaijanis in the Caucasus. There as well, once Armenia was supposed to be supported and backed by the Russians in its war with Azerbaijan, but once the invasion of Ukraine started and the sanctions against Russia became stronger, Russia had to find another way to sell its own gas and natural resources, and Azerbaijan became a strategic hub for this, but there is a political price to be paid in it, so Russia, at the end of the day, didn't do much to support Armenians against Azerbaijan. And so I really think there are many concrete aspects I'm trying to list in the book that really show how we are living today in what Pope Francis calls a divided World War III, like we cannot understand every war and every crisis without considering that there is another one next door.
What about the Chinese? I mean, did you see any evidence of Chinese support for the Russians when you were there?
No, but everywhere I went, I saw a silent Chinese presence. And I remember in the hard years of war in Damascus, Syria, for instance, where you had the city controlled by different militias, ISIS, the government, and other groups. And there were no embassies, half of the city was destroyed, but you were having a very big Chinese embassy in the city centers with red flags waving on it. And once the war kind of stopped for some moments in Syria, then the Chinese businessmen were there, to open possibilities for them. And there are many also Chinese products being sold, like in Ukraine now, in the areas controlled by Russians. So you never see, it never happened to me, to see a strong Chinese presence, but you always find a silent economic presence of them. Might this be through a diplomatic presence? Might this be through Chinese products there? Soldiers are telling me that many weapons are Chinese as well that they're using, but I could never verify it.
When the war first started in Ukraine, there was a Western fascination with it. I remember as a TV presenter, we were crossing live all the time to reporters on the ground with regular updates of what was going on the front line and the effects on the civilian population. But reportage of what's going on now has almost disappeared. It might make page 5 in the newspaper, a few lines, or there's been an overnight drone attack. But actually, it's almost as if the Western world have lost interest in the human angle to all of this. They're sort of instead totally prepossessed by Gaza. What is the situation like? What is it in terms of day-to-day life there? Is it impossible, or does life go on as normal?
Well, it's fascinating somehow to see how on front lines you still have people living there and refusing to leave. They're always a tiny minority, but they decide to stay there. Why? And I think this can be found in many other. I found it in many other wars, not just in Ukraine. for people living there, like living would mean losing everything, not just in terms of material things, the house or the properties, but it means also to lose really your identity. That's why I have the impression that elderlies are the ones that for whom is more difficult to live, because the destruction of the house, it's not just an economical loss, but it means losing the memories with your family there, with your children there, and so there is always a small part of the population deciding to stay there, and they generally get accustomed to the militias, the soldiers that are there. So they might be fine with the Ukrainians on the one side and fine with the Russians on the other side. And it's very interesting. I tend to ask to people living on the front lines, again, not just in Russia, but in the Russian-Ukrainian war, but I ask it there as well. Why are you staying here? What is keeping you here? And the answer I got the most, I think it's very interesting. It's, well, I'm staying here because there is a grave of my father or of my grandfather here. So kind of there is this fear we cannot really understand. I cannot really understand because I don't belong to these areas, of losing really what is considered to be most important, that for us would be something, I wouldn't call it banal, but not life-changing. While for many people there, it becomes life-changing.
Okay, one final personal question, I guess, from me, Luca. Why do you do this? I mean, I ask this because I've been reading. You've lost friends, people you know have died, including friends. You were almost killed yourself in a series of HIMAR explosions. I remember you saying at your book launch, which I saw on Monday evening. So what drives you personally, and has your experience of 10 years as a war correspondent left any mark, psychological mark?
Well, I guess yes. I mean, people change within 10 years, especially if they go, I think, on front lines like this. But, there's not an official category of war correspondents. I think I am, and we are like journalists dealing with international subjects, and unfortunately, wars have become central in the geopolitical arena, I would say. And so my goal at the beginning was, okay, like if I have to speak, for instance, about migration, how can I speak about migration if I don't go there where migrants come from, If I have to speak about ISIS, how can I speak about this if I don't go to Syria where ISIS has a territorial state? And then once you go there, you realize to have exclusive material, you realize you can strengthen your credibility with this. And so it's not a common job, but it has some parts of common things, for everyone. You really see that you can maybe have some more opportunities, have some more adrenaline through this work. So you just go on doing like this. And I think
You're an adrenaline junkie? You like the adrenaline?
I like also sleeping sometimes.
Okay. Well, but you don't seem to be shell-shocked. You're not on medication for stress disorder.
Well, maybe I can, hide it good. I don't know, but no, I really don't know about this. But I really think I was telling before, I'm not forced to go to war areas. Like I decided myself, and once there, I decide to go back, I can make it, And that's the difference between me as a journalist and people living there. They cannot decide to leave, and if they decide to make it, that might be the last time they see their property, their house, the last time they have to do with their original identity. And for me and for us, it's very different. We decide we decide to go there, and once it's too much, you can just leave. And this, I think, that psychologically makes the entire difference.
Did you go already with an agreement with Italian publications, or did you pick up work, because you went as a freelance journalist, correct? And did you pick up work once you were there? How did it work?
I would say 50-50. So sometimes I went with agreements, like not fixed agreement, but media telling me, okay, we're going to buy from you. Sometimes I was hired for a couple of weeks or months. So it really depends, and I think for journalists it's also very important to have good negotiation with the editors at home, because many times editors at home don't really understand the positions in which you are. For instance, that a title that they put on your article can make the difference if the Russians read it, you know. So
just messing it up. We've experienced
like
that.
I was kicked out one time because of a headline in an article of mine which was not written by me, you know. So it's very important to negotiate good conditions with the editors in order to have your freedom, in order to work properly, in order to defend your credibility towards, in Ukraine, the Russians on the one side, but also towards my readers on the other side, so that they don't get me as a pro-Russian bias, you know, and I can defend my credibility. And so sometimes you have to consider, you know, local soldiers, local pressures, but also pressures from home.
Okay, that's great. Luca, thanks for coming in.
Thank you
Good
so much for
luck
having me here.
with the book, and, well, good luck getting back into the country, I guess. Meanwhile, Luca is writing for Brussels Signal, so you can see some more of his work on our homepage. We're not letting you go. You stay right where you are, because we don't never have Alex in the studio, so we're going to take advantage of her in many different ways. Thanks for watching.